The delicate crystal champagne flute seemed to float for a terrible second before Serafina Aldridge's fingers lost their grip entirely, the stem tracing a brief arc through the air. It exploded against the polished white marble floor of the Barcelona penthouse, its facets shattering into a constellation of sharp, glittering pieces, precisely mirroring the fragmentation of her world. Spread across the rich mahogany desk before her were the photographs. Dozens of glossed prints, each a silent, searing dagger plunged into her heart. They captured her husband, Damien Rochefort, in sickening intimacy. His hands tangled possessively in another woman's dark hair, his mouth consuming lips that were definitively not hers. Scattered beneath the images, hotel receipts bore dates Serafina remembered with excruciating clarity. The night of their anniversary dinner, which Damien had aborted, citing a sudden business emergency in Frankfurt. Her own birthday celebration, curtailed abruptly by an urgent client call. The weekend getaway they had planned to the Balearics, cancelled due to a supposed crisis at his investment firm. Yet, it wasn't merely the stark evidence of the infidelity that sent a deep, paralyzing chill through her veins. It was the laughter captured in one specific, dreadful image. Damien's face, usually reserved, was utterly alight with pure, unadulterated joy as he gazed down at the stranger. An incandescent expression she realized with mounting, sickening horror she had not seen directed at her in years. This woman was not some casual distraction, not a regrettable fling. She was someone Damien clearly cherished, someone who elicited a happiness Serafina, despite her devotion, had manifestly failed to provide. Her magnificent diamond wedding ring, a 3-carat promise of forever, suddenly felt like a heavy, searing shackle burning the delicate skin of her finger. With fine tremors running through her hand, she twisted it off. The thick white gold band, once the definitive symbol of permanence, was now nothing more than an ornate, expensive lie. It struck the hard surface of the desk with a tiny, sharp ping that echoed unervingly in the vast, stifling silence of their empty home. Serafina's breath caught in sharp, shallow bursts as her eyes continued to sweep over the cold, undeniable evidence of her husband's meticulously constructed double life. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of her unwavering devotion, her absolute trust, her blind, radiant faith in their shared future. Every milestone, every anniversary, every whispered promise, every moment of perceived tenderness, all built precariously upon a foundation of calculated deception. But as she stood there, surveying the wreckage of her marriage, something unanticipated and profoundly cold began to coalesce within her chest. It wasn't just the raw, debilitating pain or the crushing weight of betrayal. It was something infinitely more potent and dangerous. A glacial, razor-sharp fury that started whispering promises of consequences Damien couldn't possibly begin to fathom. Only 6 months prior, Serafina Aldridge had been the very embodiment of contentment, efficiently managing the challenging European expansion of Meridian Architectural Consultancy from their elegant, light-filled office overlooking Barcelona's historic Gothic quarter. The ancient stone facades and the labyrinthine narrow cobblestone streets below seemed to hum with centuries of accumulated stories, and she often found herself pausing, idly wondering what complex tales those immutable walls would eventually tell about her own life. At 29, she had secured her position as one of Southern Europe's most innovative and respected architectural consultants, specializing in the delicate, high-stakes art of modernizing protected historic properties while meticulously preserving their intrinsic cultural soul. Her husband, Damien Rochefort, worked in the high-pressure world of international finance, his life defined by frequent, necessary travel between the concrete jungles of London, the disciplined banks of Zurich, and the financial hubs of Frankfurt for his elite investment firm. Their marriage, Serafina had always believed, was uniquely designed to accommodate his intensely demanding schedule. Or so she had willingly convinced herself. She genuinely admired his ambition, respected his dedication to his high-powered career, and never once questioned the escalating frequency of late-night calls or the emergency trips that seemed to multiply with the passing of every month. Their penthouse, perched high within the highly desirable, upscale Izample district, perfectly mirrored their enviable success and cosmopolitan tastes. Vast, floor-to-ceiling windows framed panoramic, postcard-perfect views of gaudiest architectural masterpieces, while the interior, a stunning blend of modern minimalism and carefully curated, museum-quality antiques, spoke volumes about Serafina's refined and expert aesthetic sensibilities. She had personally overseen the design of every single detail, from the cool, custom-cut Italian marble countertops that flowed through the kitchen to the strategic, museum-like placement of significant artwork acquired during their professional travels across the continent. But recently, an insidious, subtle shift had begun to undermine the carefully balanced ecosystem of their marriage. Damien's absences stretched longer. His explanations grew undeniably vaguer. Phone conversations terminated abruptly the moment she entered a room. His expensive laptop, once routinely left open and accessible on their sleek kitchen island, now required new passwords she hadn't been given. The intimate, languid dinners they used to share on their terrace, gazing out over the dark expanse of the Mediterranean, had devolved into rushed, silent meals punctuated by distracted, evasive glances. Initially, Serafina had logically attributed these unsettling changes to increasing work stress. She knew the global financial markets had become dangerously volatile, and she understood Damien's high-net-worth clients demanded constant, absolute attention. She had even proactively encouraged him to take on the additional, time-consuming responsibilities that now seemed to utterly consume him. Supporting his professional ambitions felt like an integral part of being a good wife, the kind of robust, understanding partnership she had envisioned when she breathlessly accepted his proposal 3 years earlier. The proposal itself had been flawlessly orchestrated, a memory she still treasured. A surprise, private dinner at the exclusive, Michelin-starred restaurant on Tibidabo, Barcelona's highest point, perched dramatically above the curving harbor. As the intricate tapestry of city lights sparkled far below them and the Mediterranean stretched endlessly toward the black horizon, Damien had dropped smoothly to one knee, presenting a ring that had genuinely stolen her breath away. She could still vividly recall the intense, physical weight of that moment, the frantic, hopeful hammering of her heart, as he spoke of building an irreplaceable future together, of the wild adventures they would share, and of the dream of growing old side by side in this magnificent city they had both unconditionally fallen in love with. Their wedding had been a spectacular celebration of international elegance. A moving ceremony held within the breathtaking Art Nouveau grandeur of the Palau de la Música Catalana, followed by a lavish reception that seamlessly brought together their friends from across the entirety of Europe. Serafina's discerning colleagues from London, Paris, and Milan mingled effortlessly with Damien's highly connected financial world associates, creating the kind of sophisticated, cosmopolitan gathering that perfectly reflected their shared ambition and global outlook. For 2.5 years, their marriage had felt like a masterpiece currently in progress. They entertained frequently. Their dinner parties became legendary fixtures among Barcelona's elite expatriate community. Serafina would spend days planning intricate menus that skillfully showcased local, refined Catalan cuisine alongside innovative international favorites, while Damien meticulously curated the exceptional wine selections from vineyards they had personally visited together across the prestigious regions of France and Italy. Their guests frequently commented on their palpable chemistry, the synchronized, seamless grace with which they moved through their roles as effortlessly coordinated hosts. But standing now in the vast, cool home office where she had made the devastating discovery, Serafina understood the profound, bitter truth. Somewhere along the way, she had quietly become a minor supporting character in the highly dramatic narrative of her own life. While she had been painstakingly perfecting multi-course dinner parties and managing complex international projects, while she had been endlessly understanding about his convenient absences and accommodating his constant demands, Damien had been constructing an entirely separate, fully functional existence. The woman in the photographs was striking, not in a manufactured way, but with an effortless, natural charisma that made Serafina's chest constrict with a painful, unwelcome comparison. But far beyond her undeniable beauty, it was the raw, immediate intimacy captured in those frozen images that delivered the deepest cut. The casual, protective way Damien's arm rested around her shoulders, the unspoken inside jokes that danced across their faces, the undeniable comfort of breakfast scenes, domestic snapshots that bore zero resemblance to the rushed, distracted morning routine Serafina had grown tragically accustomed to sharing with her husband. As the afternoon sun slanted brutally through their windows, casting long, accusing shadows across the scattered, humiliating evidence before her, Serafina felt the last fragile vestiges of her naive old life crystallizing into something impossibly hard and utterly unbreakable. The woman she had been, the one who was constantly trusting, accommodating, and endlessly patient, was dissolving like sugar dropped into cold rain. In her place, someone new was swiftly emerging. Someone who would no longer accept vague explanations that didn't remotely add up, promises that were consistently broken, or a version of love that was fundamentally untrue. The ancient, throbbing rhythm of the city continued beyond the plate glass. But inside the penthouse that had once represented everything she believed she wanted, Serafina was already beginning her slow, meticulous disappearance from the woman she used to be. The dangerous patterns had been clearly visible all along, Serafina realized with growing, chilling clarity over the following days, each memory now violently reframed through the harsh, uncompromising lens of truth. How had she possibly missed the neon signs that seemed so blindingly obvious in retrospect? How had she managed to convince herself, repeatedly, that his flimsy explanations made logical sense when they so demonstrably did not? She began to trace the timeline of his deception with the same methodical, analytical precision she applied to her most complex architectural projects. There was the emergency trip to Geneva that had suspiciously coincided with her sister's rare visit from London. A visit when Serafina had desperately needed him there to meet the only family member who had bothered to make the long journey to Barcelona. The cancelled anniversary dinner due to a crisis at the Frankfurt office, immediately followed by photographs on his company's social media feed showing the entire staff at a casual, celebratory team lunch on that very same afternoon. The highly important conference in Zurich, where he claimed the hotel Wi-Fi was too poor and unreliable for video calls, forcing her to celebrate her promotion to senior partner entirely alone. Each recalled slight felt like a fresh, debilitating wound, but even more devastating was the brutal recognition of how thoroughly she had gaslit herself into accepting his preposterous excuses. She had become an unwilling expert at filling in the vast, black gaps in his manufactured stories, at constructing elaborate narratives that smoothed over glaring inconsistencies that should have immediately raised blaring red flags. When sympathetic colleagues politely inquired about his frequent absence from social events, she had perfected the performative art of spinning his blatant neglect into admirable, relentless dedication to his career. The microviolences, she now understood, had been subtle but utterly constant. The casual, almost imperceptible way he would glance dismissively at his phone screen during her stories about challenging clients or exciting new projects. His attention drifting just enough to powerfully communicate that her hard-won professional achievements weren't quite interesting or significant enough to hold his full focus. The irritatingly dismissive way he would suggest that her natural emotional responses to his manipulative behavior were somehow overly sensitive or dramatic, slowly but effectively eroding her hard-earned trust in her own perceptions and judgment. She distinctly remembered the formal dinner party 3 months ago, when she had spent days painstakingly preparing a magnificent, traditional Catalan menu intended to deeply impress his powerful visiting clients. The paella had been perfect, the conversation flowed effortlessly, and the entire evening seemed a complete success. But later, as they quietly cleaned up the wreckage in the kitchen, Damien had cruelly mentioned that his clients had found the meal a bit provincial and might have privately preferred something more broadly international. The comment had stung sharply, but she had dutifully absorbed it as constructive feedback, rather than recognizing it instantly as a calculated diminishment of her talent and immense effort. Now, she saw clearly how systematically he had undermined her confidence in social situations, making subtle, insidious comments about her conversation topics being too focused on work, her laughter being too loud or too robust, her strongly held opinions being too much for mixed company. She had gradually learned to meticulously moderate herself in their shared social spaces, slowly becoming a dimmed, less vibrant version of the focused, dynamic woman her international colleagues knew and deeply respected. The financial aspects of their relationship revealed another deep layer of his strategic control, previously unacknowledged. While she earned a substantial, 6-figure income from her successful consultancy, Damien had gradually and smoothly taken over the management of all their joint expenses, claiming his background in global finance made him better suited to handle complex investments and long-term planning. She technically retained access to their accounts, but she rarely looked at them, operating entirely on blind trust in his financial judgment. Now, she wondered what other damning secrets might be skillfully concealed in transactions she had never thought to examine. The isolation, too, had been dangerously gradual and meticulously strategic. His soft-spoken suggestions that her close friend Isadora from Milan was probably jealous of their relationship, leading her to initiate fewer video calls and plan fewer visits. His gentle but firm discouragement from attending professional conferences that would take her away for long weekends. He might be in town, darling. The way he had artfully framed her ambitious plans for expanding her consultancy into other demanding European markets as unnecessarily stressful when their current life was so perfect already. She had slowly surrendered crucial pieces of herself, so subtly that she hadn't truly noticed their absence until this absolute moment of clarity. The woman who had courageously built an international career through bold vision and ruthless innovation had somehow devolved into someone who second-guessed every major decision, who sought approval for choices she had once made with instinctive, absolute certainty. The cruelest realization was how often, and how fiercely, she had defended him both to herself and to others. When her mother had expressed genuine concern about his relentless, frequent absences, Serafina had passionately argued that successful modern marriages required extraordinary understanding and extreme flexibility. When her assistant had innocently mentioned that other clients' spouses occasionally brought in lunch or flowers, Serafina had instantly explained that Damien expressed his love differently, through providing uncompromising financial security and stability, rather than through performative, empty romantic gestures. She had become the unwitting architect of her own tragic diminishment, constructing elaborate, high-reaching justifications for treatment that no self-respecting woman should ever accept. Every single excuse she had manufactured for him had been another perfectly cut brick in the high, separating wall that divided her from the stark, uncomfortable truth of her situation. Standing now in their expansive, minimalist bedroom, where she had subsequently uncovered additional damning evidence. Receipts tucked strategically behind his dresser, a second, unfamiliar phone charger that didn't match any known device, details of hotel loyalty programs she had never heard of. Serafina felt the full, crushing weight of her own complicity in this protracted deception. She had been so devastatingly invested in portraying the perfect wife, the perfectly understanding partner, the effortlessly successful woman who made everything look flawless, that she had completely lost sight of the fundamental question of whether she was actually truly happy. But with this painful, absolute recognition came something unexpected and sharp, relief. The incessant, persistent nagging sense that something was deeply wrong, the constant feeling that she was failing somehow despite her absolute best efforts, the exhausting, ceaseless work of constantly adjusting her own expectations. All of it suddenly, unequivocally made sense. She wasn't losing her mind, and she wasn't failing as a wife. She was simply irrevocably married to a man who had never, ever deserved her devotion. The glittering Barcelona skyline shone beyond their bedroom windows as evening descended. But inside their meticulously designed, hollow home, Serafina was quietly, methodically cataloging every shared possession, every document, every essential piece of evidence she would need for the new, autonomous life she was already preparing to reclaim. The breaking point arrived on a cold Thursday evening in October, when the autumnal Mediterranean light cast everything in dramatic shades of amber and shadow. Damien returned from what he had claimed was a brief, crucial overnight trip to Madrid, full of extravagant apologies and detailed explanations about delayed budget flights and conference calls that had frustratingly run late. He brought her favorite pastries from a quaint shop she adored near the Barcelona Cathedral, the kind of small, seemingly thoughtful gesture that had once had the power to melt her heart, but which now felt clinical, like Exhibit A in a case she was building against him. As he retreated to the bathroom to shower, his expensive phone lay carelessly, inevitably, on their kitchen island, buzzing insistently with a message preview that instantly froze the blood in her veins. Asterisk, can't wait to see you again next week. The hotel in Santorini looks perfect. Santorini, the iconic Greek island they had talked about visiting for their next significant wedding anniversary. the very destination she had been secretly researching and meticulously planning as a complete surprise for their upcoming celebration. But according to his synced work calendar, which she could see reflected in the notification banner, he would officially be in Munich that week for crucial meetings with German investors. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably as she realized this was her moment of absolute, irrefutable clarity. Not the photographs she had discovered weeks prior, not the accumulating, mounting evidence of his meticulously maintained double life, but this single, casual message that revealed he was actively planning to take another woman to the one place that was meant to be exclusively theirs. The cruelty was so breathtaking in its audacity that for a long moment, she couldn't physically move. When Damien emerged from the steamy bathroom, refreshed and unsuspecting, she was standing exactly where he had left her. The phone still clutched tightly in her hand, the damning message still glowing on the screen. The sequence of emotions that flickered across his face, initial surprise, swift calculation, then the smooth, practiced transition into concerned confusion, told her every single thing she needed to know about how well-rehearsed he had become at deception. "Sarah, sweetheart, why do you have my phone?" The casual use of her pet nickname, the subtle tone that expertly suggested she was overstepping reasonable marital boundaries by simply holding a device he had carelessly abandoned in their shared space, the immediate, familiar deflection that sought to make her the problem rather than addressing the explosive content she had just seen. It was a masterclass in manipulation that she now recognized with crystal clarity. Who is she? The question emerged steady, colder, and far quieter than she had expected. Who is who? "Sarah, I don't understand what you're upset about." But she could see plainly that he understood everything perfectly. She could literally see the internal gears turning behind his calculating eyes as he rapidly computed how much she knew, how much he could still credibly deny, and what new, convoluted story might still salvage his comfortable situation. The man she had married was revealing himself to be someone who could lie directly to her face with the utter, unflinching confidence of a person who had been doing it successfully, invisibly, for years. "The woman you're taking to Santorini. The woman in the photographs I found in your office. The woman you've been living a completely separate life with while I've been here constructing ridiculous excuses for why my husband is never home." Something deep shifted in Damien's expression. A fleeting flicker of what might have been relief at finally not having to maintain the exhausting pretense anymore. "Sarah, listen. It's truly not what you think. It's complicated, but it doesn't fundamentally change what we have together." The sheer, staggering audacity of that statement, the nauseating suggestion that what they had was still somehow worth preserving, that she should somehow gracefully accommodate his profound betrayal as just another complex aspect of their relationship requiring her understanding, triggered something volcanic in Serafina that felt exactly like waking up after years of forced sleep. "What we have." She set his phone down precisely and deliberately on the countertop, her voice gaining strength, steeling itself with each delivered word. "What we have is me building an entire life around someone who was never genuinely here. What we have is me making increasingly ridiculous excuses for behavior I would never, ever accept from anyone else in the world. What we have is you actively living two full lives while I was left here living half of one. You're being dramatic. People work through these things. We can work through this." There it was again. The familiar, automatic dismissal of her powerful emotional response as excessive, the immediate minimization of the scope of what he had committed, the fundamental assumption that she would once again humbly adjust her entire expectations to accommodate his selfish choices. But the woman standing in their pristine kitchen was no longer the same malleable woman who had been quietly absorbing these diminishments for years. Work through what exactly? Work through your meticulously planned double life? Work through you planning romantic getaways with another woman while I was busy planning anniversary surprises for us? Work through the inescapable fact that you feel so little genuine human connection to me that you needed to construct an entirely separate, fully functional relationship just to feel truly alive. "Sarah, please don't make this bigger than it needs to be." But it was already as large, as monumental as it absolutely needed to be. Standing there, gazing at this man she had loved, trusted, and painstakingly built dreams with, Serafina could see with perfect, terrible clarity that she was staring at a stranger. Someone who had been utterly content to let her love him completely while offering nothing authentic in return. someone who viewed her unwavering devotion as a mere convenience rather than a precious gift. The devastating red flags she had blindly missed were suddenly everywhere. The subtle, persistent way he had discouraged her professional ambitions when they conflicted with his convenience. The systematic, strategic isolation from friends who might have helped her see the ugly truth. The insidious financial control disguised as responsible partnership. The profound emotional manipulation disguised as her being too sensitive. But far more crucial than recognizing what he had done to her, she was recognizing what she had willingly allowed herself to become. A shadow, a supporting character in her own compelling life. Someone who had deliberately made herself smaller and smaller to accommodate someone else's fragile comfort. "I want you to leave," she stated simply, unequivocally. "Tonight. Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. This is our home, our life. You can't just. I can do exactly what I want. This might be our home legally." She cut him off, her voice vibrating with a dangerous new authority. "But it stopped being our life the exact moment you decided to build a secret one somewhere else." As the final words left her mouth, she felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. The absolute, immovable certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was worth and would no longer accept anything less than the truth. The capable woman who had built an international career, who had transformed Barcelona into her cherished home through sheer professional determination and undeniable talent, who had created beauty and meaning and success through her own singular vision. That woman was still vividly there, and she was unequivocally done being invisible. Damien attempted several more manipulative approaches. Feigned anger, desperate bargaining, tearful promises to immediately end the affair, weak suggestions of couples counseling. But Serafina was no longer listening to the sound of his voice. She was already mentally cataloging the intricate details of what needed to be accomplished. Which high-powered lawyers she would call first, which assets were indisputably hers alone, which entirely new life she was now going to construct from the smoking ashes of this one. As he finally retreated, leaving the penthouse with a single suitcase of hastily gathered belongings and a string of empty, pathetic threats about the high financial cost this decision would incur upon her, Serafina stood alone in the vast, elegant space they had shared. She felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Complete and absolute silence from the voice in her head that had spent so long frantically inventing excuses for someone else's terrible choices. For the first time in years, she was finally terrifyingly awake. The woman who eventually emerged from the wreckage of her 3-year marriage bore chillingly little resemblance to the accommodating, endlessly patient wife who had spent 36 months manufacturing justifications for someone else's sustained neglect. In the 6 months following Damien's forced departure, Serafina didn't merely rebuild her life. She methodically architected something entirely new, something complex, resilient, and belonging completely to her alone. The immediate first step had been the wholesale reclamation of her professional ambitions with a focused vengeance that surprised even her closest colleagues. Within weeks of the official divorce filing, she had decisively contacted every major architectural firm across Europe about the bold expansion plans she had previously shelved in a misguided effort to maintain domestic harmony. The responses were instantaneous and overwhelmingly enthusiastic. Her formidable reputation for innovative heritage preservation had only grown in prestige during her years of forced, domestic moderation, and prominent firms in London, Paris, and Milan were aggressively eager to discuss lucrative partnerships. By mid-December, she had signed definitive agreements to open satellite offices in 3 major European capitals, with herself installed as the undisputed head of all continental operations. The very same ambition that Damien had quietly, consistently discouraged as unnecessarily stressful, was now generating career opportunities that far exceeded even her most optimistic pre-divorce projections. Without someone constantly questioning whether she was pushing too hard or taking on too much, Serafina discovered deep, untapped reserves of energy and a ferocious creativity she hadn't realized had been dormant. The effort of managing her own career, unburdened by the constant low-grade stress of accommodating another person's fragile ego and chaotic schedule, paradoxically gave her more fuel. The Barcelona office, which had previously been a muted compromise, a space where she tried to balance her sophisticated vision with consideration for Damien's outdated preferences for conservative neutrality, now underwent a total aesthetic reclamation. It transformed into a dynamic environment that reflected her unique architectural philosophy entirely. The pale, hesitant walls were now vibrant canvases, showcasing high-resolution projects from across her burgeoning international portfolio. Stunning, detailed photographs of 16th-century Tuscan palazzos seamlessly integrated with schematics for cutting-edge sustainable technology installations. Medieval structures were reborn on paper as sleek, contemporary cultural centers. Ancient stone facades artfully concealed completely modern, glass and steel interiors. Her internal team had exploded in size, expanding from 3 local administrative employees to a core group of 15 international specialists, each expert in a different, highly niche aspect of heritage architecture, from Byzantine stonework to digitized preservation modeling. The energy pulsating through the office was electric, driven by projects that fundamentally challenged conventional thinking about preserving the past while aggressively embracing the technological future. Without the relentless background drain of managing someone else's emotional needs and professional insecurities, Serafina found herself generating complex, innovative ideas at a pace that felt almost supernatural. The financial independence she rapidly discovered during the divorce proceedings revealed another, more insidious layer of Damien's quiet control that she hadn't fully grasped. Her own inherent earning potential, once freed from the self-imposed constraints of perpetually accommodating his travel schedule and professional preferences, turned out to be substantially, shockingly, higher than she had ever allowed herself to realize. The expanded range of her specialized consultancy services commanded premium, non-negotiable rates across competitive European markets, and several major luxury hotel chains had already approached her about exclusive, multi-year partnership agreements. But perhaps the most profound change was the palpable shift in how she carried herself through the world. The woman who had once habitually second-guessed every significant decision, who had sought external approval for choices she was perfectly qualified to make independently, had been utterly replaced by someone who acted with swift, calm, and decisive authority. Colleagues, partners, and even rival firms noticed the change immediately. The focused, commanding way she led executive meetings, the absolute confidence with which she presented radical and innovative solutions, and, most tellingly, the complete absence of the subtle deference and apologetic tone that had once characterized her professional interactions. The social transformation was equally dramatic and liberating. Without Damien's insidious influence constantly determining which friendships were deemed appropriate, and which were labeled threatening to their unit, Serafina eagerly reconnected with colleagues and close friends she had gradually distanced herself from during the suffocating years of her marriage. Isadora, her oldest friend and a renowned art curator, flew in from Milan for a quick weekend that spontaneously stretched into a week of intense, joyful rediscovery. A deep dive back into the friendship that had sustained them through their grueling early careers. Other vital connections followed. A new circle of women who had built formidable international careers purely through their own fierce vision and determination. Women who understood the particular, profound satisfaction of creating something monumental and meaningful from sheer will. Her personal space, the penthouse overlooking the city, naturally reflected this internal revolution. Once decorated with meticulous, calculated consideration for Damien's safe, neutral preferences, the apartment evolved into something that was unapologetically, vibrantly hers. Rich, tactile textures and deep jewel tones replaced the previous minimalist sterility. Bold, provocative artwork purchased from emerging international artists now covered walls that had once showcased only safe, conventional pieces chosen for market appeal. The terrace, which had been the carefully orchestrated stage for their formal, rigid dinner parties, became a relaxed, intimate space where she spontaneously entertained friends who appreciated her complex cooking, her sharp, genuine conversation, and her authentic, uncensored self. The legal aspects of her divorce had proceeded with surprising, almost anticlimactic efficiency. Damien's predictable attempts at financial manipulation and hidden transfers crumbled instantly when confronted with the detailed, scrupulously maintained documentation of their separate assets and clear earning potentials. His earlier, theatrical threats about what leaving would cost her proved utterly empty when her legal counsel, the preeminent family law team in Barcelona, demonstrated that her financial position was, in fact, substantially stronger and more secure without him. The final settlement left her with complete, uncontested ownership of the consultancy, the magnificent penthouse, and substantial liquid assets that she immediately and strategically reinvested directly back into her firm's aggressive expansion plans. If you're rooting for her like I am, show that by hitting the like button. And if you want more mini novellas like this, subscribe to the channel because there's so much more coming. By spring, the transformation was complete in ways that transcended mere professional success or financial independence. Serafina had not only recovered but magnified the version of herself that existed before she learned the debilitating habit of minimizing her own fundamental needs to accommodate someone else's comfort or insecurity. She spoke her mind freely and assertively without first calculating how her precise opinions might be received or judged. She made extensive plans for her life and business without checking whether they conflicted with anyone else's convenience or preferences. She took up emotional and physical space without ever apologizing for her presence. The woman Damien returned to Barcelona to find 6 months after their separation bore no resemblance whatsoever to the one he had smugly assumed he had left behind. When he appeared at her office unannounced, clearly expecting to find her struggling, perhaps tearful, and certainly desperate with the consequences of her impulsive decision, he instead encountered someone who had not only survived his absence but had used the vacuum he created as potent fuel for extraordinary, accelerated growth. "Sarah," he began, using the diminutive nickname that had once made her feel tenderly cherished, but now landed in the air sounding patronizing and presumptuous, a relic from a life she had discarded. "I think we really need to talk. I've made some significant changes. I ended things with her. I truly believe we can work this out." Serafina looked up slowly from massive architectural plans spread across her newly expanded, custom-built conference table. She was encircled by project leads, team members from 3 different countries, deep in the middle of planning what would soon become one of Europe's most ambitious and complex heritage preservation projects. The interruption was jarring, not because it inflicted any pain, but precisely because it was utterly, fundamentally irrelevant. "I'm sorry," she asked pleasantly, her voice calm and smooth, as if addressing a delivery person who had wandered into the completely wrong high-security office floor. "Who exactly are you here to see?" The seemingly innocent question hit its target perfectly. Damien's confident, rehearsed expression faltered instantly as he realized she was not going to engage with his transparent attempt to re-establish their old, controlling dynamic. "Sarah, don't be like this. I'm trying to fix what I broke," he pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. "Oh, you did fix it," she replied, coolly returning her attention and her gaze to the complex plans before her. "By leaving. That was the fix. Now," she continued, glancing at her watch, "I have a detailed review meeting starting in 5 minutes with investors flying in from 3 different countries. So unless you possess architectural expertise in seismic retrofitting that I'm not aware of, I need to politely ask you to leave the premises immediately." She didn't bother to watch him go. By the time she finally looked up from her focused work just moments later, he was gone, and she felt nothing more than a mild, passing annoyance at the brief disruption to her productivity. The man who had once occupied so much mental space in her thoughts, whose shallow approval she had once desperately craved, whose unpredictable presence she had once organized her entire magnificent life around, had become exactly what he deserved to be, invisible. 1 year to the day after she discovered the photographs that had shattered her old, fabricated life, Serafina stood on the rooftop terrace of her newest acquisition. A stunning, sprawling 18th-century palazzo in the heart of Milan that she was meticulously converting into the Italian headquarters of her expanding international firm. The fierce, golden sunset painted the city's ancient spires and rooftop terracotta in shades of warm copper and rose, and she felt the deep, sustaining satisfaction that comes only from building something genuinely meaningful through your own singular vision and unrelenting effort. The past year had taught her difficult lessons that no amount of accommodation, compromise, or over-understanding could ever have provided. She had learned with absolute clarity that real, mutual love doesn't require you to make yourself smaller, duller, or less ambitious to fit into someone else's narrow life. She had discovered that professional success tastes immeasurably sweeter when it's not diluted by the exhausting, constant need to manage someone else's towering insecurities. Most significantly, she had realized that the quiet, insidious voice in her head that had spent years urging her to be more understanding, more flexible, more forgiving, had never been genuine wisdom. It had been corrosive, crippling fear dressed up in politeness. Her phone buzzed, vibrating with a cascade of celebratory messages from the team in Barcelona, marking their latest, massive project win. A highly publicized contract to modernize and revitalize an entire historic district while meticulously preserving its critical cultural significance. The newly established London office had successfully secured prestigious partnerships with two major museum systems. The smaller Paris satellite office was already profitable, a full 3 months ahead of aggressive projections. What she had built wasn't merely a profitable business. It was undeniable, tangible proof that her instincts, her unique vision, and her formidable capabilities had been authentic and correct all along. The flashing red flags she had systematically ignored for years now seemed almost laughably, painfully obvious in retrospect. The subtle way Damien had consistently steered conversations away from her achievements while endlessly highlighting his own mediocre successes. The frequency with which her authentic emotional responses were labeled as excessive or dramatic, rather than appropriate reactions to his inappropriate behavior. The steady, slow erosion of her social connections under the false guise of building a stronger partnership. The deliberately opaque financial arrangements that gave him centralized control, while framing it deceptively as mere expertise. But far more valuable than recognizing his manipulations, she had learned to recognize her own deep-seated patterns of accommodation that had enabled them to flourish. The destructive way she had habitually sought external validation rather than trusting her own sharp perceptions. The automatic assumption that relationship problems were inherently her responsibility to solve through greater understanding and personal sacrifice, rather than his responsibility to address through meaningful, changed behavior. The deep-seated, paralyzing belief that being a good partner meant passively accepting treatment that no self-respecting, capable person should ever tolerate. Now, when former colleagues occasionally mentioned Damien's struggles since their separation, his highly publicized job loss following an investigation into financial irregularities, his failed, brief relationship with the woman he had left her for, his desperate attempts to rebuild a professional reputation irreversibly tarnished by ethical questions, she felt nothing beyond a mild, academic curiosity about someone she used to vaguely know. The man who had once seemed so paramount, whose casual opinion had carried such disproportionate weight in her daily decisions, had revealed himself to be exactly as substantial as the carefully constructed lies he had built their entire relationship on. The woman she had rigorously become would never again mistake someone's intense need for her accommodation as evidence of their worth. She would never again allow someone else's comfort to take precedence over her own fundamental truth. She would never again accept half-hearted, conditional love from someone who expected her wholehearted, absolute devotion in return. Her private life had evolved naturally to match this new, crystal clarity. The men who approached her now encountered someone who had clear, rigid boundaries and absolutely zero interest in projects that required her to fix, heal, or improve anyone else. She dated occasionally, but only people who met her precisely as equals, who genuinely appreciated her enormous success rather than feeling threatened by it, who understood implicitly that her time and hard-won attention were gifts to be earned through respect, rather than entitlements to be expected. The friendships she had painstakingly rebuilt were exponentially deeper and more authentic than anything she had experienced during the superficiality of her marriage. Women who had watched her gradually disappear into a polite, accommodating shadow were thrilled to rediscover the bold, funny, brilliantly focused person they remembered. New connections formed easily with other entrepreneurs and groundbreaking artists who understood the particular, intoxicating joy of creating something substantial from nothing, of fiercely turning an abstract vision into a concrete reality through relentless, persistent effort. Standing there as the last vestiges of light faded over Milan's ancient skyline, Serafina reflected on the woman she had been just one short year earlier, someone so desperately committed to making a fundamentally broken relationship work that she had completely lost sight of whether she was actually, genuinely happy. That woman felt like someone she had known long ago, someone she felt compassion toward but could never, under any circumstances, become again. The greatest gift of her profound transformation wasn't the dizzying professional success or the welcome financial independence, though both were profoundly satisfying. It wasn't even the recovery of her authentic, loud, and capable self, though that had been essential for survival. The greatest gift was the absolute, unshakable certainty that she would never again accept less than she deserved. Never again make excuses for someone else's inability or unwillingness to love her properly. Never again mistake her own generous, empathetic nature for a requirement to tolerate blatant disrespect. Every single day brought new opportunities, challenging new projects, and bold new possibilities that she pursued with the unwavering confidence of someone who had thoroughly tested her own strength and found it to be more than sufficient. The woman who had once worried intensely about being too ambitious, too demanding, or too much for someone else's limited comfort, had learned the most important lesson of all. She was exactly the right amount for someone who actually deserved her. As she finally turned to leave the terrace, returning to her work reviewing proposals for a revolutionary, multi-country project that would transform heritage architecture across Eastern Europe, Serafina smiled. She smiled at the thought of the extraordinary woman she had become, someone who had taken the worst betrayal of her life and skillfully used it as raw, potent material for building something breathtakingly extraordinary. Someone who had learned, finally, that the only person whose approval she truly needed was her own. The ring finger that had once worn a weighty symbol of false promises now bore no jewelry at all, and the absence felt like freedom itself, complete and unconditional.